Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? I can't hear you.
Can you hear us now?
Yes, now I can hear you.
Yeah, we had the mics off before.
Okay, thank you.
I'm guessing it's okay with you that we can't see you, Jason.
Just a disembodied voice at the moment, which is appropriate for Halloween.
It suggested his video was off. There he is.
Oh,
Wow. Now he's really with us.
Yes, really, really. All right. Noting the hour in the presence of a quorum, I am going to call this meeting to order. Please note that under 940 CMR 29.10(5), Jason Cole will be participating remotely during the meeting due to a geographic distance greater than 20 miles via video conference. Please note that a quorum is physically present. A roll call vote is required for any and all votes involving members participating remotely. I'd also like to note for anyone attending that this meeting is being recorded by ActonTV. First up, we have citizens' concerns. I do not believe our citizens here have concerns. So our next item is the ALG update.
Now they'll have concerns.
Yes. We had a very interesting, in the not happiest sense of the word, ALG meeting, and found out that the school is significantly, the budget is more short than they think can reasonably expect to be covered in our normal year. Normally, we'd go into the period with like $1.5 million shortfall. The school is expecting, I think they said 3 to 5 times that for themselves. So we're going to go and have a meeting on November 6th with them to discuss what on earth to do from there. They'll come back with more firm numbers. We are working from 0 numbers at this point. I don't have any spreadsheet to give you. So they are going to come back with us on the 6th. Jason, did you want to fill in?
I want to add a little bit when you're done.
Okay, they're going to come back to us on the 6th. There is this crazy idea that we will be able to make any sort of decision there. So later on, we'll talk about what we think our follow-up schedule should be to this. But we have to talk about what looks like the real discussion of an override here, what can possibly be done. So get your thinking caps on that, and Jason will fill in on anything I've missed.
Thank you, Christy. I just wanted to add that what was part of the driving force behind this was we as finance committee members were trying to enforce the traditional expectation that a go, no-go on an override would be declared by the end of October. At the first meeting of the year, ALG meeting of the year, people requested that we push that back since town meeting had been pushed back from April to May. And we all came to the consensus that having a decision by Thanksgiving would be the right thing to do. That was the last meeting, the very first meeting. Then the most recent meeting is when the superintendent looked at our $1.6 million shortfall in the ALG plan and said that they were looking at least 3 times that for their own shortfall. I do want to point out, for the matter of semantics, that the word override was only mentioned by us, but that's basically because we're the only ones being blunt about it. When pressed, the superintendent did say that he had a $4 to $5 million problem. To add that to the 1.6 that was already ingrained in the ALG plan, we don't have enough reserves to overcome that. So while the word may not have been uttered by other people, this is a conversation. This is the opening salvo of an override conversation. That said, there could be great changes in plan between now and our meeting on the 6th. So stand by, but we wanted to run back to you as quickly as we could, because if we're going to continue to have in our point of view document that we do not recommend an override, which is my personal opinion that we keep that, please be advised that the opening salvo has been shot on the concept of needing an override this year. Is that is that in keeping with your understanding of what was said at ALG, Madam Chair?
Yes.
you.
Also, along those lines, there was some concern stated that free cash will not be replenished to a level to be used at the level they would like, that it will be quite hard to stay at the 3% floor. Again, we think that, we express that we think that it should, so there's going to have to be some interesting discussions. Go ahead, Adam.
Just clarifying, free cash, the town free cash,
Town
not
free
the
cash,
E&D.
not E&D.
Thank you.
It is looking like turnbacks, both for the town and the school, are expected to be, I believe, practically non-existent. No, I'm sorry, the town was thinking they'd get like 400,000 back. And I think the school said they were effectively, don't expect turnbacks. Steve?
Well, if we were the only ones that used the term override, did anybody else use another term for how they might balance the budget?
So the current idea that, and the term that was used was A budget and B budget.
So, cuts?
Yeah.
Okay.
We did explain that we were, that it was not a good idea to attempt to go for a DPW-specific debt override in the context of trying to figure out how to simply pay the bills.
More so than that, we tried to reiterate the statement that it's not a good idea to go for both a debt exclusion and a capital and a operating override in the same year ever. And that was not necessarily fully agreed to.
We also attempted to push the idea that this needed to have been sold last year, effectively, that it's going to be real hard to get the town to agree to this on a short timeline. So we are already a little behind the eight ball if we decide this is something that we
Madam
can
Chair, if I
support.
may, I would say not the word sold, but I'd say socialized, because you
Yes.
can't sell anything
No.
in advance. But
Thank you.
getting the concept out there, some of the people who've been in the room for way longer than I have said that that was the practice back in the day, that if you're going to have an override, you socialize it the previous year.
I'd been thinking we were probably a year out on this, so it wasn't any part of my discussion, apart from we have mentioned every year that it is something, we've had it part of our internal discussions every year. But go ahead, Adam.
So did they give you a specific number that they're expecting, or?
No, we'll get that on the 6th.
Okay. Did they give any indication that it would be within what we have reserves to cover at the moment?
They didn't.
They gave us the strong expectation that the revenue shortfall and the expense, the added expense would not be something that could be covered with our current reserves.
Dave?
Yeah, sorry if I missed it, but did you expand on those two, the revenue and the expense?
Again, we're
Okay.
expecting much more firm numbers, but the expectation, the statement from the superintendent was that, well, they expected to have a good grasp of revenue, that expenses would be, and they pointed to things like health insurance trusts that they're holding at a 10% increase, which may be, pie in the sky theory, incapable of actually holding it to only 10% increase. They pointed to expenses as their main concern. And the first thing they pointed to was health insurance.
So given this extreme lack of information, would anyone like to provide us with their thoughts, guidance on our meeting that we will attend on November 6th to have sort of what I view as a first real discussion about this at ALG? Scott?
Since I missed the last meeting, and I'm kind of new to this a little bit, Steve will probably respond to my question. Only because I work with an insurance brokerage, and I work for the insurance brokerage that the town uses for its health. Have we explored, for the health cost, shopping the rates around? Or are we just accepting an increase?
we're self-insured, so yeah, we're looking at every option available at the moment, but most of them are not quick. Plan design,
But
and,
you're self-insured, you're still running through a carrier.
yeah,
So have you explored running through a different carrier?
we have. Again, nothing can be done quickly. We're under contract with Blue Cross and Blue Shield and Harvard Pilgrim until the end of June. Basically, our contracts run fiscal year to fiscal year. Like I was going to say, the plan design, things like that have to be negotiated with the unions. So even if we started tomorrow, they would not be effective until, again, next June or July 1st. That,
I guess my other question would be, is it, it's all driven by claims experience, so has there been, like, does the town have access to an underwriting review that's independent of
yes,
the carrier, and have they reviewed it, and have they decided that that is our claims experience, and there's no outliers in there that should be excluded from our claims to
We
make
have-
the rate lower?
we have an independent firm that has an underwriter that reviews every claim that goes through it. We have found that we may be getting back more on our reinsurance from last year than we had previously expected, because I just saw the quarterly report for this year and last year today. So yes, no, the claims are reviewed. I believe it is a cluster of very large claims all happening at once. We can say that with a little bit of confidence today. Yesterday, I still didn't know whether it was just a rising tide of claims everywhere or a few concentrated, very large claims.
All right, I'll talk to you offline, I don't need to banter back and forth about this, but I'll catch up with you after.
Steve, also, I think the Habit Pilgrim.
And I don't want to suggest that it's strictly.
Hold on, Jason.
Hold on.
Marion, can you use the microphone?
Also, to Steve's point, the Habit Pilgrim Healthcare with its security breach is that fiscal year '23 claims weren't hitting. So that's something else that we're looking at that affects us.
Did you have something, Steve?
Well, Jason was going to say
Oh,
something
I'm sorry,
next.
yes, Jason.
Just saying that it's probably not all health insurance, right? That's the first thing they mentioned, but that's not going to be the only thing they mention.
What I was going to say about an override is, to my recollection, the last operating override was 2005. There's not a lot of people in town who remember it. Certainly, there's nobody I can think of still active in town that participated in the campaigns to get them passed. This group of school committee people, administration, select board, town manager, it's all going to be new to them. Not necessarily new in terms of concept, but new in terms of getting one done in this town. And so things like the demographic slide we have on the number of households with kids in the school become important considerations. Because however this breaks out in terms of where the costs are, schools are going to be 2/3 at least of the issue, and in the town only 1/3. And I don't know that we've ever attempted a capital override and operating override at the same time. In 2005, we did have two options. I think we had an operating and we had one level of capital and a second level of capital. The higher level of capital failed, the lower level. So yeah, if voters are going to cut anything, they'll cut the capital first. So I wouldn't recommend going for a, how big is it? $30 million, $40 million DPW building. At the same time, you are going for a if this gap is, say, 4 or 5 million, the conventional thinking back in the dark ages was just don't do 1 year. If you go for an override, you go to an override big enough to cover multiple years, 2 or 3. So you wouldn't be talking a $5 million override, you'd be talking a $15 million override.
Jason?
Just to clarify, just because you go for the override does not mean you actually have to take out you don't have to actually tax all of the override in 1 year. So while we may authorize 10, 12, 14 million in the override, that doesn't hit the tax, but that doesn't necessarily mean it hits the taxpayer's bill in 1 fiscal year. Correct?
Jason, would you like to bring up your point about the town that you raised?
I probably had a bunch of points about town that I raised.
About the FTEs.
While I appreciate that the town manager did not fill positions as quickly as perhaps he could have during the COVID years, I think it is very important to note that over the last 2 years, the school district has laid off many people. The first tranche of cuts disproportionately affected classroom assistants. Last year's tranche of cuts were heavy on classroom teachers as well. In the meantime, at least in the last 2 years, the FTE count on the municipal side has gone up. That's not a good look when we're trying to, one of the points that Mr. Noonan said to me years ago when we were talking about overrides is you can't go for an override unless everybody's feeling some pain. If one entity, whether it be Minuteman or whatever, is feeling the pain, that's not enough to, generally speaking, garner the support required to pass an override. The other thing is, when we go for an override, we are going to be judged on whether or not all of the entities involved have been good stewards of the fiscal house. And I think it's going to be hard to say that one entity's been hiring and one entity's been firing and have that be a clear sign that we're all rowing in the same direction.
Adam?
So I believe your question was, do we want to make any comments or suggestions for you going into the ALG?
Yes.
And my comment would be that from the Finance Committee's point of view, we should probably be quiet, patient, listen. I think generally revenues are known in these streams. They have very little variance, but it sounds like probably the expense side is maybe what's driving this. And I think we have to have faith in the management of both of our budgeting entities that they probably see this kind of thing coming, and I believe that they can probably come up with a solution that covers all, if not most of it, before seeking an override. So I guess my advice would be sit back and listen and let them solve the problem. It's not our duty to solve it for them.
Oh, definitely not our duty. We need to huddle a little on where we think this stands, and mostly, I imagine today is a heads up on this is what's happening. What I got out of the last meeting was they don't think they can close this gap, and they didn't see this coming. Jason?
To that point, if we do find ourselves in a situation where there is an A budget and a B budget, while it is not our responsibility to fix the problem, it is absolutely our responsibility to make sure that we are helping guide what the B budget looks like so that it can't be a simple case of we want what we want, and if we don't get what we want, the B budget is taking out all of the most beloved and wonderful things in town and saying this is what's going to get chopped if you don't accede to our ways.
Dave?
Sorry, just another clarifying question. Is the 1.5 going to 2 to 3 times that amount shortfall? Is it on the school side or both?
School expenses
And
are
I guess
exceeding.
the equivalent question would be, is there a similar shortfall on the municipal side?
We haven't heard from them
Okay.
about it. They're less far along in the budgeting. They'll give us some more preliminary numbers than the preliminary numbers from the school. Like less worked over numbers at the November 6th meeting.
And I'll just throw out some 10,000-foot observations, but it sounds like this was just found out recently, and obviously 70-80% of the school's budget is people. And so we know there's cost of living adjustments, there's collective bargaining agreements, et cetera. I'm just speculating, but those are rolling through, and maybe they weren't fully accounted for or whatever, I don't know. But it would stand to reason there's probably a similar shift on the town side unless the town did account for much larger raises or increases in living, et cetera. I'm entirely speculating. It's just unusual to say, well, these people are basically all of our expenses and it's all handled in collective bargaining agreements and we know the rate of increase, et cetera. And then to say, oh, we're blindsided by a $3 to $4 or $5 million deficit. It's just, that's a little, I'm missing something, obviously.
Jason?
Yeah, I would echo your concern, Mr. Langhoff, because I remember even though I was not an ALG member last year, and Adam, since I know you were, I think, Christine,
I wasn't.
Steve, you were as well. I remember at one ALG meeting last year, Marie Altieri, who is no longer with the school administration, did say, well, she didn't understand why we're having this conversation because she didn't see a need for an override or as far as the eye could see, which I thought at the time was an interesting thing to say when we've been showing a degradation of our reserves for year after year after year for at least the last 7 years. So I agree with you, Mr. Langhoff. I'm surprised if they're surprised, but clearly there's something going on. We need to have more numbers. I do remember that the collective bargaining for the teachers came in at 2.75%. The collective bargaining for multiple unions on the municipal side came in at 3% at the time. I'm not shying away from this. I'm happy nothing was over 3% because in theory, 3% is quote unquote absorbable in a Prop 2.5 environment plus new growth.
Marianne?
For the fiscal year '25, to your question, Jabe and Jason, is that the 5 bargaining units, the patrol, the superiors, AFSCME, which is highway, cemetery, and also the dispatches, which is the Teamsters, and the police, fire, superiors. Okay, those are the 5. That it is either 2.275 or a 2.8, so it will combine to be below 3.
But that's on top of steps and lane jumps, right? So when
We
you
do not have lane jumps.
you don't have any?
Correct.
That's just on the school side?
Correct.
That's good to know. Thank you. So that is the final number? There's
Correct.
not add-ons to that?
Yes.
Okay, because when we talk about the collective bargaining for the teachers, it's always the cost of living side, and then when you add on the lanes, it ends up being more like 4 or 5%. Okay, thanks.
Steve?
Yeah, the collective bargaining agreements weren't that outrageous that would account for this size surprise. Health Insurance Trust can't account for this much of a surprise. In the school side, the biggest item that accounts for shocking surprises is usually special ed and transportation and things like that. That's where you get multi-million-dollar surprises at times. But I was at the school committee meeting for some of it. Last week, I didn't hear anything about that. I heard about them, I guess the owner of the Concordian, or whatever it's called now, out on Route 2 is leased it out to the state as a refuge for Haitian refugees, and the schools are expecting a big influx of kids that will need.
Big being 20 people, and not, just to
but
put it in context.
Not thousands. And that there is some funding available, though the superintendent said not enough to account for that. But in terms of overrides, the thing we have to think about, and something you can put your thinking caps on until we have more details, is we're going to have to be comfortable with reserves going to almost zero. because historically, that's been a precondition. The voters don't want to give you $5 million more if you still have $5 million in the bank. So I'm sure that some of this shortfall will be covered from reserves, and they'll be going lower than we have heretofore been comfortable with.
Christine?
Yeah, so I guess I have a question about that. So for instance, just in September, I asked for rough numbers on free cash and E&D, and combined, it's about $7.5 million, which in theory could cover the shortfall. And then we possibly tank our borrowing rating, our bond rating, and then the following year, we go for the override. And not only do we have to cover the operating budget, but replenish those reserves. So is it financially sound to spend the reserves down the 1 year when you just have to get it all back, but now you've taken a hit on your fiscal soundness?
I was getting into more of a political discussion than a financial discussion, but as Jason said,
Oh, I'm sorry, hold on 1 second. Christine was actually discussing it fiscally, financially.
I know.
Okay.
But when you're going for an operating override, which unlike a capital is permanent, as Jason said, you have to demonstrate that you have been good stewards of their money, that you have a good plan for why you need the money, and that you have pretty much exhausted every other opportunity. When I first joined the Finance Committee some 18 or 19 years ago, it was just after the 2005 campaign, and the free cash the town had was $50,000.
Okay. It's not like there's a program, and if you don't check the boxes, it doesn't happen. So if our job is to advise on fiscal responsibility, we could recommend a floor to reserve spending that keeps us considered a fiscally responsible town. We could share that with taxpayers and let them know why we don't recommend spending down to $50,000 in reserves, because it's not good long-term for the health of the town, and it will cause greater costs in the long term. So, I mean, I guess I would just consider that we might have a floor of reserve number that we're not willing to go under without saying, we can't do it any other way. We've hit the floor. We have to go for the override, even though we still have some money left in the coffers.
I agree with you, but I'm just saying, we all need to start thinking about what that comfort level is, because we've been kind of relying on 3% now for a few years, and that could very easily be pierced.
Scott?
I just wanted to comment on Christine's comment that if, to her point, if we were to go down to 50,000, cost of debt goes up substantially. So maybe as part of what our supporting here is to just lay out clearly that if we were to drop things down to $50,000 of reserves, then the cost of that goes up by 2 basis points or a couple hundred basis points, which makes all the capital projects now, significantly more expensive in a rising rate environment. So that was just supporting what she was saying.
Steve?
I'm not arguing. If we're contemplating going after a DPW building for $40 million the following year, it would be foolish to ruin our credit rating this year. But I'm just telling you how these have worked in the past. And override votes at the polls have always been close.
So one thing we can do is try to quantify that. We've had discussions before and gotten information about current market rates at different levels. So it might be time to look into that. Again, that doesn't need to be immediate. Dave, were you wanting to say something? Jason, you can be next.
Yeah, and, I'll just say, obviously, a lot of this conversation may be premature until we get our arms around some of these numbers that they're going to present to us. Another thought that's occurred to me is, we did spend a lot of the beginning of my tenure on the finance committee with a lot of land purchases. I mean, the town does sit on a lot of real estate, and there could be a lot of utility that, or just value generated by other parties, and a lot of it sits vacant and unused. I mean, an override is one option, is selling unused town property another option. And I don't think that's being creative, it just would be kind of common sense of, look at all the options we have of plugging bigger holes in the budget. And that would be another one that if I was in front of the town saying, oh, we're looking to, for a 3-year override of $15 million, and by the way, we have $15 million of property we're not sure what to do with, but let's raise your taxes anyway. That's a point I wouldn't be able to debate against, me personally.
Jason?
On the topic of going below the floor, what concerns me is, and not being able to be in the minds of the taxing entities. Did they actually treat the floor as inviolable, or did they just say it's merely a recommendation and therefore we don't need to worry about it? Because if we're going to stick to our guns that this is an important thing, it should not be pierced below, because we want to have a fund in case of a shock, or a fund to make sure that we always say AAA and fiscally sound. That's great, but if that's not the same mentality that the other entities have, then we kind of have a prisoner's dilemma here, where we're saying this is a good idea, but go ahead and break it. And I'm not sure we want to say this is a good idea, but go ahead and break it. At the same time, I am very afraid of sitting in front of the town meeting and saying, well, here's $3.5 million that we already have taken from you, but you can't touch it. So it's a conundrum. It's not a great position. So I'm just very concerned that I'm not sure that everyone is treating the floor as sacrosanct as we have.
Steve?
Well, to Dave's point, yeah, I know there'll be an A and a B budget. It's within our authority to create a C budget. We don't have to accept either one. To Dave's point, we could say, yeah, sell off some land. If memory serves me correctly, a lot of our historically high reserves a few years ago went to buying land, and that's why we don't have the money now. And some of that land has not done anything. So yeah, there may be other things that we think are less deserving to be in the B budget than other people think should be in the B budget. So my recollection is we have to inform the select board in December or something if we intend to develop our own budget, but maybe that's January now, I don't know.
Dave?
Yeah, maybe just a process question on the timeline is, it is really close to town meeting, et cetera, and this is short notice. I mean, it's basically November. Realistically speaking, I mean, in the very short term, perhaps there would be some cuts and there would be some use of reserves, et cetera. But if this is a recurring deficit, we don't know, et cetera, these other options, I mean, they could be staged. I mean, we could have a short-term plug to get us through the town meeting of 2024 and then, consider bigger measures. I mean, selling land, obviously, in the next 4 or 5 months is not possible. Maybe cutting staff or reducing some other expenditures is not feasible, I don't know. And reserves is just the easiest plug over that time frame. I tend to agree with Steve, it's hard to go in with your reserve budget, your reserve balance where it is, but I'm also sensitive to the credit rating and borrowing costs and et cetera. So I don't know, I'm just spitballing. I mean, is there the decision, whatever would be presented to town meeting would be that those decisions would be made in pretty short order, right? Because the warrant will start getting fully flushed out in the very beginning of the next year. I just think we should think about it in that context of what realistically can be done over the near term and then have a next year plan. I don't know.
Yeah, it's going to be, it's quick to try to get something, a big change through on the current timeline. We'll have a lot more information to come back with. I mean, there was no way this could be anything other than a very high-level preliminary conversation. So unless someone else has something to add, we'll move on to the next item. Vlad, Jason, and I attended the Water District meeting last night to learn a little more about their PFAS situation. We had asked for more details to try to understand the scope of the borrowing. They showed a lovely chart. It's important to know they borrow their money for these projects at 0%. So their projections for any future debt are just known. If you know what it's going to cost, there's just no question of what it'll be. Of course, knowing what it's going to cost changes, but it was beautiful to have that much faith.
Can we roll the DPW building into that?
Yeah, I would love that.
'Cause-
I mentioned that. That'd be great. They have already gotten some loan forgiveness. They got, the Clean Water Trust gave $316,000 of principal forgiveness on the North Acton plant. These are all, I mean, that's a chunk. So there's hope of more of that coming in the future. It tends to happen that way. I can give you details on the terms of the loans and a bunch of the other things if you want them. I'm not sure how detailed it's really helpful to go into right now. The big takeaway that I got is that there are upgrades underway. They are, there's really only one plant that beyond what they're currently working on would need to be upgraded, but they're attempting to bypass that by bringing some new wells on in other places. So that could be pushed out until we get further into the process. The EPA just lowered the limit to a really low level, and part of what they're trying to do is not invest in everything at once, but give a little more time for the technology to mature. They had a really nice sort of rolling plan on plant upgrades that got blown away when they had to suddenly account for PFAS sort of unexpectedly and quickly make these changes. So that's something coming. Vlad will keep an eye on that for us with his wonderful experience with Water District and knowledge he's bringing to it. The other thing that they've been looking into is Acton, along with 25 other towns, has been talking to the MWRA about potentially joining. This is not anything that would be happening soon. If we did decide to do it, it's at least 10 years out and probably more than that. The idea would be, again, this is super far out, not in any way formalized, but that it could be phased in the MWRA water use as we phase out the plants we have here. So when it's time for a plant to get upgraded, rather than do that, we'd switch over more of the service. We have to get closer to that to understand the MWRA costs compared to filtration costs and maintaining our plants here. There are operational benefits. It's not just straight dollar benefits to not being. The MWRA is expensive. There are benefits outside of money that make it useful to be in. He didn't expand on what those are very much, but that'll become part of our discussion as it gets closer to seeing what needs to happen there. Big question mark right now in their upcoming budget is the cost of the filtration materials. That market is extremely volatile right now. So somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million in operating expenses for the next year. Part of that is waiting for the state to give them indications of how they're allowed to operate, how often they need to replace the filters, et cetera. We're looking at the average bill. I'm not going to say this right. They consider something a base bill if you use a minimum amount of water and basically just have service. That's currently ballpark $300, and that's expected to go up to ballpark $500 in the next year. Was that the right time frame, Jason?
Yes.
And so everyone's going to have it. That's a big jump to take, and that's before a lot of this stuff kicks in. So it just, another big jump people are getting hit with, something we have to keep an eye on. Jason?
I'd like to add, that was a great summary, but I'd like to add that the go, no-go date for the NWRA is fiscal year 27, is what they said. That the cost, the fee to join is waived, but we pretty much have to make up our mind by fiscal year 27.
Dave?
Joining the MWRA wouldn't be 0%, right?
It would not. I don't think we did a loan for that at nothing.
Okay. You know, when we talked last on the EPA website, they had some numbers about upgrading systems and what the cost would be, and it looked like our costs were many multiples of those multiples. I don't know, like, what data they have behind that. I was just curious if, in your conversations with them, did they detail the cost? Like, what is a typical town in the U.S., Massachusetts, and then Acton cost? And I'm being a little evasive with it because I know there's lots of differences and nuances, and I think we're mostly talking about North Acton water, and there's lots of different pieces to this. But one thing that EPA, I mean, the numbers they were throwing out there were pretty manageable for an average town, and I got on my soapbox about, you know, this is a very expensive project. I'll reiterate that really quickly, but this is a very expensive project to ask everyone in Massachusetts or any water districts that are in violation to get compliant is a huge ask for towns that don't have the extra resources that Acton may have, much less across the country. And so my view, without evidence, is that the state or the federal government is going to have to step in and subsidize a lot of this sort of filtration equipment, et cetera. And by being very early, we end up paying for it maybe when there would be grants or, you know, more than 0% interest loans. So I was curious, did they step around, they talk about the cost and how it, just the differential between other communities?
They did not, but I recommend that you discuss that with Vlad, and hopefully, Vlad, feel free to contact them to try to get more of that information. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk offline, but I'll just throw out there that this isn't something new. I mean, it's early. There are a lot of communities that have done this, and just getting some handle on what do these cost and like what is absolutely essential, like what's the differences between the EPA website. I've again haven't dug into under the covers with it, but the numbers are they're very large. I think what was it, 15 million or something like that? Was it 8 plus 6 plus 1 or something like that? It's just a big number for any town to get their arms around to be compliant with this. So I'm back off my soapbox.
All right, unless anyone has anything else to add to that, we will get onto the POV, which I suspect we cannot finalize at this point.
That is true. We have some slides that are waiting for information from the town and schools that we won't have until hopefully next week. But let me just join this meeting real quick so I can share my screen.
Adam?
Madam Chair, I move that we table all further discussion on the point of view until after the ALG meeting.
You can, I did some
I'm
things.
sorry, I'm talking to the chair.
No, you didn't get a second. I would like to see what Christine has so we can hopefully get, since we're all here, get some of the questions out of the way that might be around formatting. And then we clearly can't approve these before
Hey,
the
Dave,
ALG meeting.
do you think you can bump me up to a participant so I can share my screen?
Jason?
While she's loading that up, I think it is very important that we discuss tonight. We've been saying all throughout this year, in our point of view, we are not supporting an override. We're not planning on an override. Is that the message we want to bring back to the next ALG meeting? I think while we do not have as much data in front of us as we wanted to, nothing really has changed other than suddenly someone raised their hand and said, I've got an expense problem. So did we want to reiterate our position? If we voted this a week ago, or a meeting ago, chances are we would have voted to stand behind that we do not support an override. So I'd like us to discuss that tonight so that Christy and I know what to say on November 6th. And here's her answer to me.
Adam?
I would say yes. I would say we stay on the position we've been on, wait and see what their plan is. And it needs to come back to the Finance Committee so that we can all discuss and make any further suggestions.
Steve?
I like that slide. 'Cause
Not this one.
Yeah, that one.
The other one.
I like that one too, but, no, we haven't seen enough to even consider it. All we now have is rumors and speculation.
Oh, I agree. I don't think we can change the point of view at this point. I think it is worth waiting until we have more information before we finalize. Specifically, we need to get in front of the school committee. And I think it would be foolish to get in front of them before the November 6th meeting and having that information. Christine?
Okay, so I'm not going to go full screen because I'm going to read the speaker's notes that I have done a bunch of work on. And I don't know how in Google Slides to share while I see my speaker's notes. Ooh, presenter view. Hold on. Oh, there we go. Except you're seeing that, so that's still not helpful. Now I can't see my notes. All right.
Just make the whole thing big, you just saw.
Yeah, we're just going to do this. Okay. So these are the topics we'll be exploring in this presentation. We will bring each of these to your attention, blah, blah, blah. That's basically how we introduced it last year. The key points we'd like you to focus on are, 1, our spending is predicted to outpace our revenues, and we currently have a significant revenue gap. 2, our town reserves are above the 3% recommended floor, which is within DOR guidelines. The AV School District's reserves are currently below where we would like to see them, which would also be a 3% floor. 3, the town has identified many capital needs for the maintenance of town infrastructure that need addressing and come with potentially large price tags, some as operational expenses and others as potential debt exclusions. 4, our taxpayers are feeling the impact of more than just increased tax bills, and we would encourage you to consider all factors when thinking through our spending decisions for FY25 and beyond. And 5, it is time for us to start seriously considering the possibility of an operational override to support continued town and school services. Note that considering the possibility is not endorsement. Okay. This is the same. It explains what Prop 2.5 is, and it's not changed from last year. So you approved the notes last year. I'm going to assume you still like them. Okay. So this slide is pending. It needs updates from the schools and the town so that I can get us some better, more accurate forecasting. Reiterates that these are projections. Yeah.
Jason, do you want to jump in at the end of this slide, or?
My question is, who are you waiting on? Who has not responded yet, and is it in our court or in their court?
They did respond. They got back to me right away and said that they are expected to have projections for us at the end of next week or the week after.
So our operating budgets were due by division department heads a week ago Friday. Those are in, and we are meeting with John tomorrow and also next Wednesday and Thursday to go over those preliminary operating budget numbers on the town side. And we'll be ready for November 6th.
And I got the same timeline from the schools. So without,
November 6th is going to be a big day.
it's going to be exciting. Okay, so again, this slide has similar talking points because we used it last year, but it will change significantly once we have the new revenue and reserve projections. This is just our typical slide about us being a people-driven town. And the verbiage has not really changed since last year. It's just updated with new percentages where necessary. And these are things that you guys should be able to read also in the version that I sent you. You should be able to access these notes and read them if you want to take more time with them later. Thanks. Another one. So I think that, I don't remember if I changed this or not. These are the things we know and things we're able to assume when we're looking at our financial future. I think those are the same things that I wrote in last year's. Nope, it's not. We know that Minuteman is going to increase by 19% in FY25, 8% in FY26, and 3% in FY27. After that, we can expect Minuteman to remain at an average 3% increase, we hope.
Can we say that we know that Minuteman is projecting to increase?
Sure.
Because those aren't,
That's
that's just
true.
what they're telling us.
That's true. Yes. These years represent the last set of borrowing we previously agreed to for the construction of the school, as well as the increased student population from Acton. We know that the Middlesex assessment is going to increase by roughly 6% year over year, hopefully not more. The Acton Health Insurance Trust has seen costs skyrocket in order to budget and manage the fund. They may be increasing rates by more than 15%, possibly, hopefully less. Although the 3 of the 4 last years, the increase has seen, although 3 of the last 4 years, the trust has seen increases around 10%. The average cost over the last 10 years is closer to 5%. So based on that information, we're still building out a 5% increase in our longer-term model. Is there any reason to change that, Steve?
At the moment, I'd probably knock it up to at least 8.
Okay, so that's going to make it even tougher for everybody else because that's less money for the rest of the budgets. Which is kind of our point with this, that things like health insurance and Middlesex and Minuteman, as they increase, the amount left to the town and schools is much smaller. So once you've accounted for these 3 factors, what's left is the difference between those 3 fixed costs and our projected revenue. And again, they're not fixed, but they're sort of mostly outside our control. Without including free cash or ANDR budgets for all other operations can only increase by, and it's 0.37%, 1.66, et cetera, though again, these numbers will change based on the numbers we receive from the town and schools. So I'm going to move on, is that okay?
Yeah, you just have fiscal year '24 on that.
Yeah, I haven't updated
Okay,
it completely, yeah.
Make sure.
I will change those when I have new numbers to throw in here. Our reserve policy is our reserve policy. We may have are we trying to avoid an operational override? We're okay to spend down to 1.5% one-time exception, but that doesn't change the fact that our policy in general is this, so I wasn't planning to change it. This is another slide that needs the final reserve numbers from the town and schools. I suspect they're going to be difficult, but there's no update because we need those numbers in order to know what our recommendation might be. And I imagine we would have a recommendation that brings us to our reserve policy floor and then possibly another recommendation in response to a potential override. The capital project slide, same kind of language as last year. It's FY30 was added onto the end. I don't think it's fully up to date as far as school projects go, but I also don't think the schools are trying to do any projects that they don't absolutely have to. And I don't have the cost estimate yet on the admin roof replacement, which I am getting the impression they don't have a way around, but also have possible subsidizing income for. So this is our debt service slide. We used it last year, so the verbiage doesn't need a lot of updating. But this chart represents the debt service projects that are up for consideration within the next 5 years. DPW building was built in a scaled-down form from its original design back in 1969 when our community held 10,000 fewer residents. The present facility is undersized, inadequate, not in good condition, and inappropriate for present requirements. This graph projects a borrow of $35 million for 30 years at 4.85%. Sidewalk 1 and 2 in the capital plan for the town is a two-part borrow of $7.5 million each in FY '26 and '27 to fully address all of the sidewalks in Acton. This graph projects two separate borrows of $7.5 million for 30 years at 4.85%. And then Conant, when the Massachusetts School Building Authority audited our schools to see if they would meet the criteria for needs-based assistance, Gates, Douglas, and Conant all qualified. Now that the new twin school is complete, the MSBA has reached back out and said that Conant is eligible for funding. This is a long process and unlikely to see borrowing until FY '30. This graph projects a borrow of $50 million for 30 years at 6%.
Jason, is that the right timeline based on the recent discussions with the MSBA?
The timeline is correct, but I would like you to change the MSBA did not reach back out. We have been submitting letters of interest every year. So it's not that they proactively reached back out to us and said, okay, now that you've done these other two, we'll consider this other one. We have been actively soliciting to get, back in the queue for Conant.
Sure. Okay, I'll add nuance to that to
Yeah,
reflect.
the statement the MSBA has reached back out is not accurate.
Well, they responded. The putting ourselves in the queue is sort of a passive, expected, we can only do one project at a time, just keep in there. But we weren't really expecting a response so soon. So they did respond.
The way I heard it from how you read it was that since Douglas, Gates, and Conant all qualified, and automatically, once we took care of 2 out of 3, they came back and said, okay, now I'll talk to you about the third. That's not accurate, and we had to proactively say we're still interested in dealing with this.
Okay.
Scott?
Just one kind of probably stupid question, but why do we have, for 30 years, 2 different borrowing rates for 2 different projects?
Farther out, we expect the rates to go up.
So they start at different timelines?
Yes.
Okay.
It's because they start on different timelines. Yep.
Can I ask you to scroll up so I could read the top comment about the DPW building? I mean, this is making an argument for the building. I don't know if we're at that point yet.
So it's slanted in your
Yeah.
opinion? Okay, so I'll try to rewrite it with less, yep.
You could just say the DPW building has been identified as part of the town's capital plan.
Okay. The DPW building has been identified as part of the town's capital plan. Excellent. Okay. And then I'll change the wording on the MSBA as far as the schools go. Okay. So I did rework this one a little bit to say that we do not recommend a sidewalk debt exclusion project. I mean, we had at this time, at the end of that statement, and if we're heading into potential override, potential, DPW building that we really can't avoid, a discussion on Conant, I'm not sure, correct me if I'm wrong, does anybody in this committee see next 5 years, the desire to take out $15 million to do sidewalks in Acton?
I mean, I don't know, if we've had those discussions, we could, I think, put the group's opinion in there, but I don't know if we've had those. You could just neutralize a lot of the wording. You could just say, instead of saying extreme fiscal accountability, you should just say, at current borrowing rates, these projects are much more expensive or something generic like that.
Yep.
And then, I don't know, maybe I'm just being too cute.
Super cute. Yep, okay, I will look at that. So, what I wrote was future capital projects should be approached with caution. The town has done an excellent job. Well, we kind of said all that before. They bring in extra funding where appropriate. We do not recommend asking for an operational override and a debt exclusion override within the same fiscal year. Is basically the big change to the wording on that one. Because that is, I think, our general feeling that it's not a good idea. Good.
In the context of this document, is this the first time we have discussed an operating override? A budget operating override?
It's on, it's the fifth year, so I went through spending section, I went through the reserve section, I'm in the capital project section, so we're touching on it for the first time. There is an operational override section, but if you don't feel it.
No, it makes sense in our discussion right now there. I want to make sure it isn't out of context if you're just coming at this slide deck.
I don't know.
Let's come back to it.
Okay. This is the updated numbers. They didn't change. It's a 1% here, 0.5% there. The senior population is still growing. It was in the 14% range last year. So this is always a good slide, especially if we're going to be talking about who's going to be paying for what services for what budget we pass. Average single-family tax bills increased by $490 per year on average for the past 5 years. There's no getting around the high costs associated with maintaining our current services. The average single family has experienced a roughly $500 a year increase in their taxes for the past 5 years. This is on top of other cost increases we'll get into on our next slide. Please know that we make our recommendations for the coming fiscal years as FinCom members, as taxpayers, as people who want to see our community continue to provide excellent value for our tax dollars. Possibly, I'm being too cute. But so if we don't want that personalized bit, I can remove it. That's just how I think of it when I try to connect when we're presenting this with different people.
I like it. I think it's reminding them that we're not just looking at the numbers. This is not hard.
Okay.
I mean, that we have, yeah.
Good.
I like it.
Okay. Jason gave a lot of input. We had a lot of other input. So this is our cost of living slide in the big picture. Healthcare costs have skyrocketed in the past 5 years. National average is up 5.6%, and we've seen higher increases locally. Wage growth in many industries is not keeping up with inflation, and even if it were, the increases in healthcare costs, taxation, rent, insurance, et cetera, would still leave us with less disposable income for everyday needs. Residents are also likely to see a large increase in coming water bills as the water district moves to upgrade their water treatment plant to mitigate the PFAS in our water supply. And for those of you on our sewer lines, you will see an increase to that assessment to cover the cost of repairs to the treatment facility. These factors are not in the control of our budgeting bodies. These are other factors that will impact our residents and chip away at their resources for the foreseeable future, which makes it that much more imperative that we watch every dollar we spend and make sure it is absolutely necessary. Nailed it. Moving on.
Good job.
Okay, this one again is kind of our big, here's the bottom line. So there's not much we can do about this until we get the updated information. But I did write, other communities such as Nantucket, Eastham, Pepperell, Harvard, Hingham, Lancaster, Newton, Arlington, Grafton, I could go on, have proposed operational overrides in the last 5 years. The truth of the matter is, the average inflation rate increase for the past 5 years is 4.18%. That is significantly higher than Prop 2.5. The collective bargaining agreements we have that properly incentivize our town and school staffs average an increase of 4%. That is significantly higher than Prop 2.5. Healthcare costs and retirement plan costs have risen greater than 5% over the last 5 years. Borrowing rates are skyrocketing, construction costs are up, maintenance costs are up, supply costs are up, food costs are up. While we do pay a lot of money in taxes, each dollar we're paying is stretched thinner and thinner as the costs to run this business increase at a rate that is still higher than what we are taking in. Many of these associated costs are outside of the control of our town leaders. That's a bold statement that y'all have to decide if you agree with.
Yeah, I would scratch that last line.
Okay?
Could you scroll back?
Yep. Here, I can even, the slide itself doesn't matter as much, so I'll just make it bigger.
This is making a good argument for an override, which we then go on to
Yeah,
say,
But I don't think I'm saying anything that's not just simply I pulled all this data, this is fact. So anything in here that's not fact, we can, I would argue even that last statement's fact, but I'm willing to remove it. But it's really a statement of where we are and how we got here, more than how we should handle the next step.
change business in the second to last sentence.
What do you,
We're not running a business. This isn't a business.
Government,
What was that?
government,
I was just gonna say town,
Yeah.
run the town in general, because that kind of encompasses the big picture.
What would it take to get the 2.5% COLA increase into the numbers? Is that something you're hoping to be getting?
Into what numbers?
The baseline for the projected 6% increase that you have.
Oh, for Middlesex?
Yeah.
I just need those numbers from the town. They should be in any updated MLG. Are we still showing Middlesex in the ALG plan?
Yes.
Okay, so,
So then, the November 6th should hopefully have the new baseline number that we could project increases from. Thank you.
Yes.
thanks, good.
Yep.
Okay, so, yeah, it does make an argument that costs have gone up, but it's not, I don't think, anything that isn't, everything in there is actually happening. So we do have to consider these things in how we want to approach whether or not the override is this year or next year, or we either have a way around the override. These are still true things that are impacting the budgets. If the true things lead you to no other decision than we need an override, that's not because they're slanted.
That would-
Is that?
Yep.
Okay,
Again, without the numbers, but
yeah,
yeah, we knew the numbers weren't going to add up forever.
yeah. So, I don't like that answer. It's what I found when I put this together. And obviously, this isn't final. Everybody can have more input because we still have numbers coming in. So at this time, the Finance Committee has not been provided a detailed account of the budgeting shortfall that makes an operating override a necessity. So we certainly wouldn't support one without something to convince us. This is pretty basic. Inflation, healthcare, insurance, rent, other costs will remain high for the foreseeable future. Recession still possible. All spending should be analyzed, one of those, for necessity. And town and schools must manage budgets within revenue sources to avoid an operational override. And then this just is the detail that was in the slide above, but that made it maybe confusing, so I've put it into the appendix. It'll be updated This is our OPEB situation. We like to keep it in here. This is our reserves statement, as what all we have, it needs to be updated. This is the cost of a single bedroom rental in Acton for the past 2 years.
How many units is that?
That's a one-bedroom unit.
I guess, how many are there in town? I'm wondering.
Oh, I don't know.
How many, if it's not a lot of units? It could be-
That's a good point. I will look into that. I'm just going to leave myself a note here. Yep, okay. That was one that, one of our residents asked to have included, so, but I will look into that. That's important. This is very exciting. So, I spent a lot of time digging around, and I was able to find the old information on average single family as opposed to median single family.
I hate average.
No, it's the better one, because,
No.
yes, because median moves significantly.
Average means you take all the really expensive homes and you can pull up the median. Median is the exact middle.
It's not, that's the mean. Median is the middle of all of the numbers.
It's the middle number.
No, it's the middle of quantity.
Yeah,
It's not the middle of quality.
Median is median.
yeah,
You have 11 houses.
yes,
The 11th house is worth $2 million.
okay.
Yeah.
All the other houses are worth
The middle,
200,000.
In the order,
The
Yeah.
average is going to be
or the
north.
average of the middle two.
It's
used-
still going to be the average.
But it's a number that's not representative of the majority of the
No
houses.
number is perfect.
Well, I know, but I think average is,
No, we stopped using average because we couldn't get it anymore.
yeah, but we had a big argument about median anyhow.
About median not being great, but we were using it anyway.
Okay, put another way, I think median income is more important
All right.
than average income.
But the discussion is moot because which one is not available?
Well, now I got it back.
Yes.
I was so excited. I found average again. Everything's average.
No, but that was the historic, isn't there, one of those was wiped out?
Yeah, I found it.
She found it.
Oh.
Because I'm an internet sleuth.
That's the cause of the discussion.
What it gets us that we lost, that was super useful, is our comparison chart, which you cannot read because it's too small. I'll make it as big as I can. Which gave us how much are we increasing as a percentage of income, which is a nice way to talk about, yes, your taxes are going up. So is your income, it feels like your taxes are skyrocketing up, but as a percentage of your income, is it really? And this was a great way to give us that data and to also compare to other towns like Boxborough, they're 4.78%.
And the answer is yes, our tax rate, our tax burden as a percentage of our income is going up.
Yep, that's what
The
this
government is
shows.
costing us more than it did before. That is the irrefutable fact of this chart.
To spin that slightly, we're asking the government to buy more expensive things is part of that. It's not just the government saying we want more. They're doing it at resident
Agreed,
behest.
it's all approved at town meeting, but still, the government, the cost of government is taking a larger slice of the individual pie.
The government is town meeting members.
Yes, but most people won't think of it that way. That's why I was saying resident.
No, but I'm agreeing with you, yes. And then we have for anybody who's really interested, Maynard, Stowe, Sudbury, Westford as well. Those were the 8 that we compared with quite a few years back before we lost track of the data, but.
I will retract my objection, given that it gives us access to this information.
Yep.
Madam Chair.
Doesn't paint a great picture for us.
Steve?
Well, I wouldn't say that we're asking the government to buy more expensive things. It's a service business. We're asking for more services. or better services, but,
Just an observation, and I think these are great. And there are a number of them that the numbers on the right are flat, or in some cases slightly going down. And I'm picking on Concord because I think theirs was also going up similar to ours. If you wanted to tell a tale off of it, you could say, nearly all of our peer communities have held their tax rate as a percent of income flat, while Acton and Concord's has increased because of the increasing demand for services or something to that effect. It does distinguish the town among a larger group, peer group.
Agreed?
Sorry, Scott, yes.
Okay, thank you. I think this is good information. Looking at it, in my head, I'm thinking what would be interesting to see. Jason can't hear me? All right, sorry, Jason, I was leaning back.
Better now.
I was thinking that might be interesting to see next to this is the change in population. Because if you could say that, let's say the population growth in the town has been, 4% consistently. You could then look at this and then say, if you were to normalize it for the population growth, you might look at it a little bit differently. It may not look like a straight increase, because some services are dependent upon number of people, like teachers, police, fire, maybe not fire, but definitely, police and teachers. So if we're getting more people, then it's requiring more services, and then services tend to be like a step function. Like you get to a certain point where you need to hire more, and then you have a little capacity for a number of years, then you have to hire more. So that may not play out here, but if you were able to go back in time, you might be able to say that, maybe it's like 2013 was the year we had to hire 10 more police officers because the population reached a point where we weren't servicing the population with the number of officers we had. So just a thought.
Hence why I asked at the beginning of the year that we start paying attention to where the postal step functions of new growth, of new population and increased count.
Yep. Okay, anyway, that was the appendix. This is where the point of view stands. We've made some tweaks. The biggest changes are going to come when we get the final numbers on budget projections and reserves. And there's not much more we can do until we have those numbers.
Adam? No, I was going to ask if anyone had anything to add.
It's been said before, and I'll say it again. Christine, thank you. The amount of time you put into this, the amount of revisions you make at our request it's worth some praise. Thank you.
All right. Moving on to committee business. Currently, we have not had any minutes to review, so we'll not be voting on any. Do we have any liaison?
Christie, Teresa has been sending them?
I know. They have not
Okay,
been distributed.
okay. I just wanted to make
No,
sure
no,
that
thank
you
you.
received them, okay.
Yes, we've had some internal confusion.
Oh, okay.
Liaison reports. I don't see any. Okay, future meeting dates. The next ALG meeting is November 6th.
What
And
time?
What time is the ALG meeting?
Yeah,
7
is
a.m.
it 7 a.m.?
And if you hold on one second.
Is it Zoom or is it in person again?
It's presumably both.
In person.
It's been hybrid.
So they're doing it hybrid from this room?
Yes.
Thank you.
And looking at November, and then the next one projected in there was to be on November 20th. Given how the November 6th meeting goes, I imagine we might meet on the 13th. So I have a question of whether we would like to have our meeting the day after the ALG meeting on November 7th, so that if there is a quick turnaround, we can meet before Put another way, I'm proposing to move our November 14th meeting to November 7th.
Yes, please.
I was just going to say that, is there any conflict with Election Day? Is there anything going to be happening here that would be a problem?
Elections are held over at the school.
Yeah.
We have met on Election Day before.
Okay.
And if we can't get the room, we'll find some other public venue.
I'm available.
Yeah, I'm available.
Yep, I'm
I
available.
would prefer the 7th over my son's birthday, yes.
Okay, so we will switch our November 14th to the
14th.
7th meeting. There's a chance we'll have to meet on the 14th too, hopefully that, we'll see about that. But I will find a location and get back to everyone about that. We should, if nothing else, have more information, although you won't have had a chance to update the slides.
If I get stuff on the 6th, I'll get it updated. I'll get it done. And don't forget to let Roland know.
Yes, thank you. Okay,
Madam Chair,
yes.
may I request that rather than all the entities show up on the 6th with their data, it'd be great to have a day or two in advance notice so we can take a look at it, rather than just have the data dumped at us at ALG.
You're requesting me to request the town and the school to give us the LG update before, earlier?
If it's not too much to ask.
I will certainly ask. Any other announcements or committee business? All right. Vlad, you're up.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
All right, Isha, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Cole?
Aye.
Mr. Khan? Mr. Noldy?
Aye.
Mr. Noon?
Aye.
Ms. Anderson?
Aye.
Ms. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan?
Aye.
And I say aye.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thanks, everyone. Good night, Jason.